Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on relationship safety and sexual health. My name is Ruchika Singh, and I'm the project coordinator at COSTI. I will be your presenter for this webinar. Thank you for taking the time out and being here with me. We are going to cover these following topics in this order: sexual consent, sexual violence, sexual assault, sexual harassment, and we will also be looking at sexual health. Let's begin by looking at what is sexual consent. Consent is the voluntary agreement to engage in sexual activity of any kind. Each partner must actively and willingly give their consent to sexual activity. If there is no consent, then it is a sexual assault, which is a crime in Canada. Everyone has the right to say no to sexual acts of any kinds. And if someone says no to you, you must respect that. Moving on to some facts about sexual consent. Sexual consent can never be obtained through threats or coercion. It can be withdrawn at any time. It cannot be given if the perpetrator abuses a position of trust, power, or authority. And it cannot be given by anyone except the person participating in the sexual activity. For example, your brother, your sister, your parent, girlfriend, boyfriend, spouse, friend, so on, cannot consent on your behalf. Moving on to the age of consent. It is important to note that in Canada, children cannot legally consent to sexual activity even if they agree to sexual acts. The law says they are not capable of consenting. If you engage in sexual activity with someone under the age of consent, you have committed a sexual assault. The legal age of consent is 16 years old. If you have sex with someone under the age of consent, it is considered statutory rape, a type of sexual assault, and you have broken the law. However, there are some exceptions to the age of consent law. Teenagers who are close in age can legally consent to sexual acts with each other. For example, a teenager who is 15 years old can legally consent to sexual activity with a teenager who's 17 years old. The age of consent is 18 when a relationship involves a person in authority. A person in authority could be a teacher, a coach, a boss, or even a family friend. A 16 or a 17-year-old cannot legally consent to sex with someone who has any authority over them. No one under the age of 18 can consent to work in prostitution or pornography. If you want to engage in sexual activity, you should make that clear to your partner so that they can be confident you are giving your consent. If your partner says no in any way, they are withholding their consent. Everyone in Canada has the right to say no to sexual activity or sexual acts of any kind and at any time. You have the right to withdraw your consent, which means you can change your mind at any time. You can refuse your consent even if you're married or in an intimate relationship. That means you have the right to say no to your husband, boyfriend, wife, or girlfriend. You cannot legally consent if you are intoxicated or unconscious. That means if someone has had too much to drink, they cannot legally consent to sex. You cannot be pressured or coerced into consent through threats, fears, or even tricks. Getting consent. We all have a responsibility to listen to our partners and pay attention to their wants and needs. It is important to understand that in Canada, silence or not resisting is not the same as consenting to them. In other words, just because a person does not say no does not mean that they are not consenting. Sometimes people who are uncomfortable with sexual activity will usually freeze or maybe even too afraid to resist. It is important to make sure your sexual partner really wants to engage in sexual activity. Even if you think it's obvious, you should still ask and make sure. This is sometimes called affirmative consent or enthusiastic consent. Sexual violence is a broad term that describes any violence, physical or psychological, carried out through sexual means or by targeting sexuality. Sexual violence takes different forms and also can include sexual abuse, sexual assault, rape, incest, childhood sexual abuse, rape during armed conflict, sexual harassment, stalking, indecent or sexualized exposure, degrading sexual imagery, voyeurism, cyber harassment, trafficking, and also sexual exploitation. Moving on to who is affected by sexual violence. Sexual violence crosses all social boundaries, affects people of every age and cultural background, and has devastating impacts on the lives of survivors and their families as well, and also the well-being of the society. Statistics show that 1 in 3 Canadian women experience sexual violence, and 1 in 8 Canadian men experience sexual violence. These statistics have been derived from the source, which is listed on the slide, which is ontario.ca/page/sexual violence. Sexual assault. Forcing sexual acts of any kind, including touching or kissing on another person without their consent, is sexual assault. Research shows that sexual assaults are committed by men against women. However, men can also be victims of sexual assault, and sexual assault can also occur between same-sex partners. When most people think of sexual assault, they usually think of rape. Rape is, however, only one example of sexual assault. Sexual assault includes any unwanted sexual activity. This includes kissing, touching, or sexual intercourse. It also includes taking naked or suggestive photographs or videos of a person without their knowledge or consent. If you have been sexually assaulted, there are many ways to get help. If you are in danger or need medical help, you should immediately call 911. You can also call the Assaulted Woman's Helpline for assistance. Their number is 1-866-863-0511. You can also visit their website, which is mentioned on the slide. You can also tell a friend, a counselor, or a medical professional. The important thing here is to tell someone because you should not deal with this situation alone. Let's look at sexual harassment now. Harassment is unwanted sexual attention, which can include sexual comments, demanding sexual activity, or showing sexual images. Commenting on someone's appearance or forcing someone to look at images is also considered a form of sexual harassment. We usually think of sexual harassment as something that happens in the workplace, but harassment can happen anywhere, especially with people in positions of authority. Sexual harassment in the workplace, schools, and housing is a violation of the Ontario Human Rights Code. Sexual harassment may also be treated as a crime if the victim feels threatened or unsafe. If you are being sexually harassed at work or school, you should report it immediately. Be sure to keep a record of the harassment. Save all the emails, texts, or other messages. Take notes about the harassment. Write down what happens and when, and the names of both people involved during the harassing situation and also any witnesses. Then report the harassment to the correct authorities. This might be your supervisor or your human resource department. At school, you can report it to your campus safety or security uh, um, people. You cannot be disciplined for reporting harassment, and your employer must investigate the incident. The Ontario Ministry of Labour provides many resources and information about what you should do if you experience sexual harassment at work. Your workplace also should have an anti-harassment policy and provide information on what to do. What is sexual health? According to the World Health Organization, sexual health is a state of physical, mental, and social well-being in relation to sexuality. It requires a positive and a respectful approach to sexuality and sexual relationships, as well as the possibility of having pleasurable and safe sexual experiences, free of coercion, discrimination, and violence. We should all be concerned about our sexual and reproductive health, even if we are not or we do not wish to be sexually active. Understanding our bodies will help us stay healthy and safe. Your campus health center has information and services related to sexual health. This includes information about sexuality, consent, safe sex, contraception, as well as health examination and tests. Sometimes it can be difficult to talk about sex and sexual health. If you are uncomfortable talking about sexuality to your doctor or staff at the campus healthcare center, you can visit a sexual health clinic in your local community. There are clinics all over Ontario and they are free and confidential. Sexual health clinics have nurses, doctors, and counselors. Their expert services are free and confidential and include education and counseling. Other services include pregnancy tests, low or free birth control, free condoms, and tests for sexually transmitted infections and HIV. You can also get counseling about any of these issues, including sexual assault, understanding your sexuality, how to manage a sexual health condition, and what to do for an unplanned pregnancy. You can find a sexual health clinic near you by visiting the Sexual Health Ontario website, which is mentioned on this slide. This website also has a free online chat. Some important things to remember. Consent is the agreement to engage in sexual activity. You have the right to say no and change your mind. Consent should be enthusiastic. Sexual acts without consent is sexual assault. Unwanted sexual attention is sexual harassment. And lastly, your sexual health is very important. This webinar was brought to you by the O2O program. O2O program is a bilingual program funded by Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada and the Government of Ontario. The program has been designed to expedite and facilitate the settlement of newcomers to Ontario and help them make better and informed choices. On this slide, we have mentioned our email, our phone number, and also our website. For any of your questions, you can please email them to us, and also you can also call us. And for more resources, please do visit our website. COSTI Immigrant Services is a community-based multicultural agency specifically focused on providing services to all newcomers who are settling in the Greater Toronto Area. COSTI provides educational, social, and employment services to help newcomers become self-sufficient and settled in their new community. COSTI, in its role of Provincial Coordinator for O2O program, has brought you this webinar today. Thank you everyone for joining me for today's webinar, and please let us know if you have any questions.